jobs and regions will be transformed through our collective action to tackle climate change.
Set ourselves ambitious targets, and for that it is important to transform our industry and not to destroy our industry, because our political goal is to leave no one behind.
The next 5 years will be critical in addressing climate change in Europe. The voice of gas workers needs to be heard in this process.
It's an existential necessity for the European Union, for our global leadership and climate ambition. It means no worker, no region is left behind. And together in the gas sector, we're working to make that a reality.
If you want to know more about how we can address just transition,
Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, one of the last events of the year. You're joining us today to talk about ensuring a just transition to climate neutrality. My name is Sonja van Rensen. I'm a journalist, a freelance journalist and moderator here in Brussels, and I'm also the managing editor of a new digital energy publication called Energy Monitor that was launched by the New Statesman Group in September. So all very fresh, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look. The just transition is one of the subjects we've been publishing more and more on, and I think it's a theme that is only going to gain in importance. We see the impact of COVID. We see an economic recession, probably unparalleled to what we've seen in our lifetimes. And at the same time, we see a push for a green recovery. We see new, more ambitious climate targets. We see the election of Joe Biden across the Atlantic. And therefore, these two big trends somehow have to be brought into coherence with one another. And that's where the just transition comes in. So we're here today to talk with a new initiative called the European Social Partners in the Gas Industry. And so this is particularly talking about the future of workers in gas. And of course, there's a knock-on effect there. There are lots of industries that also depend on that gas. So what does the energy transition hold in store for them? A few housekeeping rules before we kick off. One, the webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to re-watch it later. It will be made available shortly after this morning on certainly Eurogas's website, and I imagine the other partners' websites too. Everyone, please keep your mics and cameras off. Speakers, obviously, when you take the floor, you're supposed to switch those back on. And everyone else, questions. So we're going to hear from all of our speakers at the start. I've asked them to be as brief as possible. The idea is, I know we're not all in the same room together, but we nonetheless have a conversation, and we're here to take your questions and discuss those as well as mine. There's a Q&A box, and that's the place to send in your questions. So it's not the chat, it's the Q&A box. I'll see those come in, the panelists will too, and I'll put them to the panelists as and when seems appropriate. I think that's it on housekeeping. So with that, I'd like to welcome our opening speaker this morning, the MEP Denis Radka from Germany, the EPP group. He's originally from the Ruhr area, so he's very familiar with gas and industry, has worked in the trade union movement since his earliest days, and is today a member of the European Parliament's Committee for Employment and Social Affairs, as well as a deputy member on the ITRE, so Industry, Research and Energy Committee. And he's here today because he is co-rapporteur, together with Agnes Jongerius, who we'll hear from in a moment too, of a report, a known initiative report led by his committee on a strong social Europe for just transitions. And I should warn you, both MEPs are sitting slightly on hot coals since their report is up for a full vote by the Parliament tomorrow. So, Mr. Radke, I'd like to hand over to you to kick us off this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Sonja, very much. Dear colleagues, friends, dear Agnes, It's a pleasure for me to be with you this morning. Unfortunately, I have to say one more webinar because I would love to do this in presence, but it is like it is. And I think the topic we are discussing this morning is so important that you can say, okay, well, it is another webinar, but this topic is so hot and so important. Then let's do it this way.
Yeah. Sorry, do you want to switch on your camera? You don't have to, but
okay.
If you can, it'll help people focus on what you're saying.
I can switch on my camera. But in the beginning, we were asked to shut it down. So sometimes I do what I'm asked for. So again, although I do not like webinars very much, this topic is very important, and it is better to discuss it in a webinar than not to discuss it. And you are absolutely right. We Agnes and I are a bit under pressure because we have voting session today and tomorrow on our report, but that is our personal problem. But it is a pleasure for me that Agnes and I are together here in this webinar because although we are divided through our political groups, we have a lot in common. That is, we both have life before politics. We both work for a trade union in our country, and we both share the belief that climate change, or tackling climate change, is one of the biggest socio-economic challenges we are facing in this century, and it is important not only to set out ambitious targets in reducing CO2 emissions, in tackling climate change, but we also have to have a close look on what is happening with our industry and in our industry. Because you announced that I come from the rural area, a very industrial area in the very heart of Europe. We closed down our last coal mine in 2018, but we still have a lot of steel industry. We have the biggest steel industry in Europe, in my constituency, and I can assure you what is the situation there is that the workers are really concerned about what is happening, because they fear of their personal future. They are in fear that they are going to lose their jobs. And so I think it is up to us as politicians to first explain what is happening, and then do not stop with just explaining. Then we have to come up with concrete help and concrete measures. And when you look what happened in the last week, I think this was really a giant step. Because the result of the summit last week is that we now have green light, on the one hand, for the biggest EU budget in history. We have green light for the recovery fund with 750 billion euros in fighting the economic crisis we have throughout the COVID pandemic. And it gives us money for just transition, for realizing the Green Deal and helping our industry in the transforming process, because this is very important for me. I want that the industry will be transformed in Europe and not destroyed and being driven out of Europe. That is very important to save the industries and to save the jobs we have in industry. And we are always or often talking about what is good work, what is decent work. With workers' council, with collective agreement, with fair and proper salary. And that is what we find in Europe's industry. So I have a big interest, that is one of my major interests, in saving these jobs and ensure that transforming process is one of the major topics in Parliament. And for me, it is important. We are now talking a lot of transforming our industry on a hydrogen basis. I agree with that. That is an important point. But
I think in my eyes, we are making one mistake again. We are now talking about hydrogen, but we have a lot of colleagues who already say, okay, let's change to hydrogen, but it's only green hydrogen. We can only, the solution can only be green hydrogen. And I do not agree with that, because we are at the beginning of a transforming process. And so it is not possible to say, okay, we do the transforming, but only with green hydrogen. I think we have to be open also for other forms, and so it is important to be in discussion with Eurogas, because gas will be a solution, is in a key position for helping in changing in this transformation process. And finally, I like to have some words on the report I've done together with Agnes. The reason we did this was, on the one hand, we wanted to shape this just transition process and make clear what is important for us. And of course, the voice of the workers' right, is one important point in this process. And I really criticize also Ms. von der Leyen, that she is talking with Greta and talking with Luisa Neubauer from Fridays for Futures, but she's not talking to steel workers in Duisburg, in Poland, or at any other place in Europe. So the workers' voice is really important in this process. And when we are talking about Europe's future and how we want to live in 10, 20, or 30 years, it is also very important that we get some ambitious goals and some targets which we can measure also in social politics. And so we came up with a kind of Porto agenda with concrete, ambitious targets which we can measure. And so that is one of the reasons what is so important. We are fighting for getting a majority in this process. So maybe this from me, just for the start, for the kickoff, and I'm looking forward to the debate, to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think you've already given us something to discuss. I've seen a first question come in about blue hydrogen already. We'll park that until we get to the debate, but thank you for the question. We've noted it. I'd like to hand over then to Agnes Jongerius, so co-hosting today, and as I already said, co-rapporteur on the report on a strong and social Europe for just transitions. She comes from the Netherlands. She's a member of the PvdA, so the Dutch Labour Party, has been a member of the European Parliament since 2014 and is a spokesperson for the S&D Group on Employment and Social Affairs, also a substitute on the International Trade Committee in the Parliament. And again, like Mr. Radka, has a long history of working within the trade union movement, in this case, in the Netherlands. So I'd like to hand over to you. And maybe indeed, I see Mr. Radka has just disappeared. Perfect if you switch your cameras and mics on when you're speaking. And once we've heard from everyone, then
I switch on again when I'm talking.
Yeah, exactly. Okay? Then we can switch them all on once we've heard from everyone for the debate, so we're all visible at the same time. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. And indeed, thank you, EPSU, industriAll, and Eurogas for organizing this event, because I think it's topical, it's urgent, and as Dennis said, I think it's worthwhile to spend the last webinar of the year on. And let me, in a way, also follow his first 10 minutes by saying that, of course, every now and then people make this statement: we have to guarantee that no one is being left behind. And that sounds nice, but it's only when these words are being followed by concrete deeds that it's indeed helpful. Well, we all know that We need to step up on the green transition. We all know that we have to be prepared for the digital revolution going on. And with Denis, I'm deeply convinced that this can only be done in a just way when it's embedded in social investment in people. And it's also necessary to realize that people in some regions are encountering more problems, more obstacles to overcome than in other regions. Some sectors will have more difficulties in undergoing these transitions than others, and perhaps make indeed now the clear statements to follow up on that of Denis. It definitely requires more workers' participation and consultation if you want to do this transition in a sustainable way. So I think it's of course wonderful that Greta Thunberg has a seat at the table. But I think it's important that the workers in these sectors and these unions also have a say in how these changes should take place. Because I think until now we see a lot of spreadsheet management in the target session, and I think time is up to call for an end to this spreadsheet management. I read these statements accompanying this webinar before, and I think your joint statement touches a lot upon skills. And I do understand that you need people with the right expertise and workmanship. But to be totally honest, I don't believe reskilling and upskilling is the solution for all our problems. And of course, I have nothing against upskilling and reskilling. But being here in the European Parliament, talking to employers' organizations, upskilling and reskilling is all they call for. And to be clear, I don't count Eurogas under these voices, but I encounter a lot of employers only pleading for upskilling and reskilling. And of course, this upskilling and reskilling should then be paid with collective money. So it's in a way, I want to make use of a high-skilled workforce, but I don't invest in my people myself. And I think this is the wrong storyline. I think it's important to see that reskilling and upskilling is not enough to do the trick alone. And I think if this is the only story people are being told, go school yourself, go reskill yourself, people get upset with that because they very well understand that it's not so easy in reality. I think it's clear that the labor market in general is much more demanding than, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago. For instance, a simple truck driver. I started my work for the trade union movement of truck drivers. But a truck driver simply does not support only goods from A to B. He has to deliver just in time, all of the time. And otherwise, production is coming to a complete standstill. So I think the honest story is that we also need to step up for those people in sectors where we cannot maintain all the jobs. And I think it's clear that the European Parliament is going much further than the member states. For instance, in strengthening the European Globalization Adjustments Fund. But I think it's very timely that now we are going to debate the extra demands. So I'm not against upskilling and reskilling. I'm for binding targets and for workers' participation. But let's see what else is on the wish list on the Christmas shopping list of EPSU, industriAll and Eurogas. Are more than welcome to listen to the next debate. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you. We've had another question come in. We'll keep this one as well for the debate. Let's move on then to Jan-Willem Goudriaan. I'd like to welcome him as our next speaker. He's the General Secretary of the European Federation of Public Services Trade Unions, so that's EPSU, has been in this position since 2014 and previously worked in the Dutch Public Services Trade Union. He's been involved in this sector for a long time and actually pioneered a social dialogue with employers in the electricity, gas and local government sector. I should say he's also was the proposer of the first ever successful European Citizens Initiative on the human right to water and sanitation, which collected almost 2 million signatures. But we're here to talk about just transition and the gas sector specifically today. So what kind of a future do you see for workers in gas?
Thank you, Sonia. Just if you can put up your thumb if you hear me well. I see. Good morning to you, to our MEPs, Denis and Agnes, to my colleagues to my comrades of industriAll, and to Eurogas, the employers, and all of you here listening and looking at this debate. The EPSU is the European Federation of Public Service Unions, and we organize workers across a range of public services and including in the energy sector. Our members work in difficult, dangerous circumstances, and we, our families and our communities are also users of energy and understand the importance of the economy and society of safe, sustainable, affordable energy at all times. We think production, transport, distribution of energy are public service missions, and access to energy is a right, and these are issues important to recognize when we develop also our policies around energy for the future. At our Congress in 2014, we have said that climate change is the largest threat facing this and future generations. And we have also worked with the likes of the Futures for Fridays, Greta Thunberg and her colleagues here, also at Belgium, European, in other countries, and have advocated for ambitious targets and measures. We think the Green Deal the Commission has proposed and the broad agenda there is a step in the right direction, and the next 5 years will be crucial for the future of Europe. We also agree with what Denis and Agnes have just mentioned, that we have to ensure that workers' interests are recognized, and that's not always happening. And therefore, reaching the climate goals, the carbon neutral economy, is a priority for us, and it must be done, must be achieved in an inclusive way. It also means in our industries, we have to consider how we contribute to achieve these objectives, what it means for workers, how we deal with negative consequences, and focus also on the opportunities. I think Denis mentioned that. But it is important that the voice of workers is recognized in that debate. Workers in effective industries, and we're talking here about the gas industry, they must have a future. And that's why the trade unions, the employers, with our joint statement, also take responsibility and want to be involved in the discussions of this just transition, while also ensuring that people have access to clean energy. We signed this joint statement in November after quite a number of constructive discussions in our European Social Dialogue Committee, where employers and unions from the member states come together at EU level. And as you can see and read in our joint statement, ensuring social responsible transition to renewable decarbonized gases, we believe will provide high quality employment for workers and help achieve climate objectives. It is also important that this is discussed in our sectors at national level, at European level, but also at the workplace, where we have to look at how it affects jobs directly. And that means that there's also something we as unions expect of the employers to consult, discuss with the workforce, with the unions on the future of the company, on the future of the sector, which direction are we going, what do the targets mean for our companies, how do we make the changes, what plans are necessary to accompany this transition, what training is required, but also how can we ensure good pay and conditions as part of collective agreement. I think Agnes referred to the fact of skilling, upskilling, that is important, but within a context of a good paying conditions and a collective agreement. From the Commission, we also expect something to involve us as social partners to test, assess its plans with regard to their social impact. What does it mean for workers, for employment? And all of these issues are addressed in the joint statement, which has a very key part, is that we as employers and unions also subscribe to the ILO definitions around just transition and what that means. And this is something we are working on with the employers, and we look forward to work with the employers on this in our European structure and contribute that to the discussion. Sonia, I would leave it here for a first entry into the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Let's move on then to Judith Curtin-Darling, Deputy General Secretary of industriAll Europe. So that's representing the manufacturing, mining and energy workers across 38 European countries. She was formerly a Labour member of the European Parliament for the northeast of England, and prior to that worked for a long time in the labour and trade union movement, was also Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation back almost 10 years ago now. Judith, so you speak on behalf of the industries, perhaps not the gas industry itself, but certainly industries that are very much impacted, but what goes on in the gas industry as users of gas, notably the energy intensives. So looking forward to hearing from you. How do you see a just transition in your sector, and what impacts do you see of what's going on in the world of gas?
Thanks very much, Sonia. And in fact, we represent manufacturing, mining and energy workers across Europe. So we are co-social partners with EPSU, representing the workers in the gas industry in the sectoral social dialogue. And I mean, we're facing in our industries, the energy sector, but also the manufacturing industries, a twin transition. As Agnes said, we have major challenges in relation to digitalisation, but I'm going to focus today on the green transition because I think the discussion around climate neutrality and what that means in terms of just transition for the gas industry and the industries which depend on gas infrastructure and the transformation in the gas industry is really at the heart of much of our work at industriAll Europe. It goes without saying that we as a trade union federation fully support the objective of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. And our focus is really intensively on how we get to it in a socially acceptable way, ensuring that decarbonisation happens without deindustrialisation, as Denis said in his introduction. For us, that must mean a comprehensive framework for just transition, not odd spots of just transition, not just skills policies, not just small pots of money, but really a comprehensive framework. What we're facing in terms of decarbonisation in 3 decades is unprecedented. For many industries, this is a capital investment cycle. And the gas industry, we know through our work in the social dialogue together with Eurogas, will be radically transformed in the next decades, driven mainly by renewable gas and low emission hydrogen. But we have to recognise that the gas industry and the transformation in the gas industry and infrastructure is absolutely vital in the roadmaps for most of our energy intensive industries across Europe as well. So we all know that there is, and rightly, that there is no significant space for unabated natural gas in a net zero scenario. And we also know that decarbonisation should be mainly driven by energy efficiency, electrification, the massive rollout of renewable energy, and the transition to a more circular economy. But we also know that in some member states, other forms of low carbon energy will continue to be a major part of the energy mix. So when we're looking at the framework that's been put forward by the European Union, I think we have to be clear that these are political choices which are being made. In our view, necessary choices. The Paris Agreement, Europe's Green Deal, are interventions into market forces to internalize the external costs of climate change. Therefore, because politicians, and rightly, we believe, have decided to take this initiative, that means that they also have the responsibility for creating the framework which allows the transition in a just manner for workforces and their communities. And for us, that means 4 elements. The first is about the overall framework in our view should be a framework of anticipation of change. It's not rocket science. Much of that framework is well known in terms of how you anticipate structural change in industries already, but the scale of the challenge means that we need to turbo boost that framework. So we need a framework which ensures a sustainable industrial policy, creating good quality jobs based on innovation and investment. And as far as employment's concerned, if we look at the potential for the gas sector from hydrogen, biogas, biomethane, then there is a major significant potential in terms of jobs, something anywhere between 600,000 to 850,000 additional direct jobs and 1.1 to 1.5 million indirect jobs by 2050. And this is according to a study from the industry, I should say. But we need European and EU industrial leadership in clean gas technologies. That means a comprehensive industrial policy framework, industrial alliances, a policy framework which ensures the integration along ecosystems so that those energy intensive industries investments are tied in also with the transition in the gas sector. We're seeing a lot, for example, in hydrogen. We have examples in steel, in rail supply, aerospace, road transport. But what we're worried about is that much of the manufacturing of equipment is happening outside Europe. And what we would like to see is an industrial policy for the manufacturing of energy equipment, which ensures good jobs in our sector in the future, and that we're not effectively buying in equipment from the US or from China, South Korea, and others. So we need that comprehensive industrial policy framework. The second is, as Jan Willem said, is we need the labour transition framework for workers, not just skills training programs, but really a comprehensive framework which supports each worker through anticipation agreements, worker information and consultation. Third, we need good social protection schemes, which ensure that there's a safety net for those who unfortunately don't make the transition without damage. And lastly, and here I reiterate a point that Agnes made, we need strong worker participation. Without worker participation, there will be no just transition in Europe. Workers have to be at the table in all the decisions which affect them. For us, it's an existential demand from our members, from the workforce, but we actually believe that it's an existential necessity for Europe and for our collective ambition, collective climate ambition, because it's only just transition that will deliver the social acceptance which is necessary to get us to net neutrality by 2050. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and also for reinforcing some of the points your colleagues had made. I've seen one question come in about the recording of the event. Yes, that will be made accessible. So that's to reassure you. Let's move to our final speaker then. And then after that, I'll come back to you, Mr. Radka, maybe for an initial reaction and to kick off the debate. James Watson, Secretary General of Eurogas. Prior to that, he headed up Solar Power Europe, and prior to that, specialized in energy and trade here in Brussels, and previously also working for the Commonwealth Secretariat, and before that in the UK. So James, over to you from a perspective from the downstream gas industry.
Thanks very much, Sonia, and thanks very much also to MEP Radka and MEP Jongerius. Also great to be here with our colleagues and friends in the unions, and yes, very happy to see a large number of participants with us today. So good morning to everybody. We're very happy to have this event today and to talk about some of the important issues, and I've been very encouraged by everything that I've heard from the 4 speakers that have gone before me. So it is always a bit of a challenge to fill in, if you like, the gap at the end of a panel. But what I will say is this: we in Eurogas fully support the direction that is taken by the European Commission and the member states in relation to climate change. We will support the achievement of climate neutrality in 2050 and agree with a target in 2030 of at least 55% CO2 reductions. This implies, nevertheless, a huge revolution in energy that we have today. Energy today is indeed very heavily based on fossil fuels, and in just 30 years' time, this can't be the case. Now, to go through such a huge revolution, we believe very strongly in Eurogas that we must make sure that the social dimension is also at the heart of this, precisely because of what Jude said. To deliver such a revolution, we must have public acceptance for what we are doing, for what we know that is right to do for the environment. We must also make right for people. And I think that this is an element that cannot be lost. And I'm very happy with the joint statement we made with the unions, because it does put the just transition as envisaged by the ILO at the heart of what we believe is the way that we should approach the climate change challenge. And I think I can speak from personal experience. I grew up in Wales during the 1980s, which was a country very heavily based on coal. And for political reasons, not environmental reasons, the coal sector was entirely destroyed within a couple of years. This led legacy issues. Communities were lost, village communities were destroyed, and maybe it took the whole country of Wales about 20, 25 years to recover from perhaps those brutal policies that we saw put forward in the 80s against the working communities there. I think that we have to make sure that when we go through the next 30 years as a European Union, that we make sure that we are understanding what needs to be done to keep communities together, to make sure that as we move from one form of energy to another, that we aren't going to leave any communities behind. And I agree with Agnes entirely, MEP Jongerius, because this isn't just about upskilling and retraining, it's about a comprehensive plan to address the needs of communities, to understand how best they will go through this energy revolution. And I think if we put that at the heart of what we are trying to achieve, then I do believe that we will be much more successful in bringing the public with us. And that means also looking at the opportunities. And I do think that it is a possibility for Europe to lead on new technologies, clean technologies, that we don't have to just import all of these technologies from all around the world. For today, for example, we lead very much in the manufacturing of electrolyzers. Europe is the home of electrolyzers. Electrolyzers are used to transfer electricity into gas. This is already recognized by the European Commission as a vital technology. We mustn't lose this leadership. We must make sure that we're investing in those factories, in those companies that are developing those new technologies, and also make sure that they are giving their workers the right kind of terms and requirements that they need to also take part in this energy transition in a good way, with good wages and good, stable and steady jobs. And I think that's what we can offer in the gas sector. As we go through our transition, we will be able to offer non-seasonal, highly professional, highly skilled jobs. Of course, these things won't necessarily happen all overnight. And I fully would recall what both Jan Willem and Judith have said, because I do believe that we need a very strong industrial policy. And this industrial policy should encourage the development of these new technologies, not just electrolyzers, but also things that relate to carbon capture and storage and pyrolysis. These are great technologies that can reduce CO2 emissions, methane emissions, and ultimately help the European Union achieve our climate objectives. So there are many different facets to what we need to do. This is a big challenge, but I believe that if we are serious about achieving our carbon and climate objectives, we must make sure that when we are coming together as different players, we are identifying the needs of the workers, We're identifying the needs of the climate change technologies that we need to have. And indeed, if we do that, I think we'll have every chance to be successful. I think that I will wrap up there, Sonia, as you are indicating that perhaps my time is coming to an end. But let me just say finally, this is about the possibility also for industrial leadership. I fully endorse what Jude said, and we must not blow that. Let us make sure that Europe is the leader in the clean gas technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, James. I'd invite everyone all our speakers to switch their cameras on now, since we're, well, officially into our panel debate. James, maybe to come back to you before I go back to Mr. Radka. The first question that came in was about blue hydrogen, and it came in whilst Mr. Radka was speaking, because you had said we're at the start of a transformation, so it's too early to talk about green hydrogen only. We need all options at the moment. And the question that came in, which you're perhaps in the best position to answer, James, was: has blue hydrogen actually been produced at scale and in a cost-effective way? And are we sure it will actually lead to emission reductions? And I think of it also because you mentioned pyrolysis and CCS at the end, and CCS, of course, is at the heart of blue hydrogen production. So can you answer that for us?
Yes, I can. I think it's fair to say at the moment there hasn't been a huge production of blue hydrogen. This doesn't mean that we can't do it, and we know how to do it, and we know how to do it at scale. Just yesterday, a group of companies announced a project called Northern Lights in the North Sea, which indeed now has passed its final investment decision, and therefore will be realized. And this will be one of the first large-scale carbon capture and storage sites in the European Union, indeed in the world. And therefore, that kind of commitment from companies in Europe demonstrates that there is a strong belief in delivering the potential of blue hydrogen within the next few years. You only have to look at the policy environments in countries around the North Sea to see that many of the countries are investing in the production of blue hydrogen and in carbon capture and storage. And this is also applied to the European Commission, where steel mills in Dunkirk, between the European Commission and Total and other companies like ArcelorMittal, are developing carbon capture and storage for the steel industry in northern France to store the carbon under the sea. The final point I'll make is that we have to be absolutely certain and clear on this, that if we do not use blue hydrogen and we do not develop carbon capture and storage, we diminish enormously our chances of delivering our climate objectives by 2050. This is something that I think is genuinely overlooked, whether that's willfully or deliberately, I don't know. But if you look at all of the major studies, including the European Commission's own, they require carbon capture and storage to deliver carbon neutrality by 2050. There is no credible study that I'm aware of which says that it's not, that it's possible to do that in such a short period of time without that technology. So we need to scale up as soon as possible, Sonia.
Yeah, okay. So I think you've answered the second part of that question too. You're saying we are sure it will lead to emission reductions in that case. Absolutely. All the models show that. Okay, I wanted then to pick up, and Mr. Radka, you're free to respond first, but the second question that came in, I think, gets a little bit to the heart of our discussion. It came from Katie Treadwell. And basically it said, she's asking, is this really about giving communities a brighter, better future? Or is this more about hydrogen and keeping the gas industry alive and kicking? And behind that, as she explained, is asking, how reasonable is it to say we can keep current workers in gas employed when hydrogen may be produced elsewhere? It's true, there's often a large import dimension to the hydrogen story. Secondly, at much lower volumes. And thirdly, for different end uses to fossil or natural gas. And I guess for me, that gets a little bit to the heart of the discussion. We talk on paper about a transition, a just transition. And even when it comes to blue and green hydrogen, those are produced in very different ways, presumably very different locations. So whilst we can easily talk about a transition from blue to green on paper, and maybe from a climate perspective, that's great. Is that realistic also in terms of a jobs transition? Would someone like to, Mr. Radka, would you like to kick off and just give your thoughts on that? So really looking on the ground, what is actually possible?
Okay, that's a lot of stuff to come in, but if I'm allowed to, just one point to what James just said. I believe we need CCS technology. But with the CCS technology, it is the same like we have on other technologies. We are very easy in announcing, okay, these are our goals, and this is what we do not want. But we have a lot of difficulties in making clear, okay, and that is what we enter now. And we have a very problematic discussion in Germany about CCS technology. The majority knows we need this, but no one wants it. It is in his backyard. So it's the old discussion, yes, but please not in my backyard. And we won't solve any problem if we go on with politics like this. And the same we have in the debate on blue or green hydrogen. And I say for the beginning of the transforming process, we also need a gray hydrogen. Because we at the moment we do not have all the capacities we need. So there will be a big need. We will need a lot of hydrogen. So this also to the question that was asked. I'm pretty sure we will keep a lot of jobs. We will create a lot of jobs because the need of hydrogen is so big, so that I believe this industry will also grow within the European Union. And the first part of the question, is this only about industries, or is it about the community's concerns? And I think this is deeply connected. Not only the gas industry, also the steel industry. This is very important. We are discussing about green steel made in Germany, but we have to ensure that it is possible that we can achieve that goal, that we help the companies in this transforming process. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs in the steel industry, which are at stake at the moment. So it's not only about the gas industry. It's a major topic for the steel industry and for all the people who are working in this industry, and all the people who are working in deeply connected industries with so. I'm really getting furious when people say, "Oh, you are just doing your work for your industry." No, I'm doing it for the people. I'm doing it for the people who are working in this industry, and that is very important. And maybe one last point for me, as a politician, there are two major topics which are all above. That is personal credibility and to be honest. And what really bothers me is, you know, where I'm coming from. I work for the coal miners industries, and I always said, I will never let you down. And I fought for these colleagues until the very end. And there were colleagues, political friends, who said, oh, Denis, you have to let them down. Gas is the future. We have to leave coal industry behind us. Gas is the future. But the same colleagues now, as we left coal industry in Germany, now say, oh no, gas is not the future, just green hydrogen, forget about gas. So this has nothing to do with being honest and personal credibility. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
Can I ask you
this is
to
what
wrap
I
up?
meant. We are just, we are.
Can I ask you to come to a close? Sorry, I just want to give the others a chance to come back.
I think this is a good point to close. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point.
No, I'm very emotional on this topic. I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry. It's better to have a passionate speaker than someone who doesn't seem interested in what they're saying. So I think it's don't worry. And what you say is very true. So a transition indeed. So people who initially said, right, we need to move from coal to gas, and that's a question in itself. In some parts of Europe, that is what energy transition means. And in other parts of Europe, we're already saying, well, we need to move from gas to low carbon or green gas, or indeed to electricity, or, you know, can we do without gas altogether? So the conversation is different, indeed, very different in different parts of Europe. And I guess the question, I wanted to put a little bit the same question to the other speakers, and maybe especially those from the trade union. So how, I mean, in jobs, how can you simply move workers from natural gas into gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen, green hydrogen? How easy or difficult is that? And I guess what do we need to be aware of when we talk about a transition that, as I say, looks great on paper, but is perhaps very different when it comes to people and jobs?
Maybe I'll jump in at that point, because from our perspective, this is really a fundamental question. There is going to be, in this transition, there is going to be a very potentially different impact in different parts of Europe, and I think we have to have a framework which recognises the different dynamics. The different dynamics in different regions according to their industrial makeup, and also their closeness in some ways to maybe the sea in one respect, and also their closeness in terms of other industrial assets. So in terms of that kind of comprehensive view, in our view in the gas sector, there will be players in the gas sector who will still be here in 2050, the same companies, but their model will have transformed, and their economic business model will have changed. But jobs within that industry will still be there, and there will be opportunities for people. And that's a question of transforming jobs. There will be other parts of the industry which will disappear over the course of the next 30 years. And that's a question of managing that restructuring. And you can only really manage that on a very in a very detailed way in sectoral and company strategies to ensure that that transition is just for the workers in both cases. What we've laid out today are some of the broad principles which have to be in place to ensure that that transition can be just for workers in different regions, in different parts of the sector. But I would really reiterate the point that Denis made about not getting too hung up on a dichotomy between industries and communities, because for the importance of the gas infrastructure in Europe it will be centrally important for a large number of other industries in different places across Europe. If you look at the roadmaps to 2050 for the cement industry, if you look at the roadmap to 2050 for the steel industry, for the chemicals industry, for the other energy intensive industries, gas transformation and the gas infrastructure is absolutely vital for their transformation. And everything which has been said in terms of ensuring that that is really a comprehensive model, that there is CCS, that we recognize that the International Energy Agency and all European modeling has said that within that transition there has to be CCS capacity for the transition. We also, I think, have to be realistic and not ideological about some of the technologies. Obviously, we want to avoid stranded assets. That doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't help in terms of investment and public money in what will become stranded assets. But on the other hand, in order to get a viable large-scale hydrogen industry, we are going to have to grow it, and we're going to have to grow it very, very quickly. And we don't have the renewable capacity at the moment to jump straight to green renewable energy, hydrogen, or even low carbon hydrogen if you include hydrogen produced from nuclear. So we have to be realistic about the pathway to build up the production, because we know that these technologies, the renewable gas and the hydrogen, are vital for many, many thousands more jobs across Europe than just the jobs in the gas sector itself. But I don't think it's I think it's kind of a ridiculous idea to think that in 2050 we won't have jobs in the gas sector. It will just be, there will be different jobs, and we need to have the training programs, the accompanying programs, the anticipation of change to ensure that that is as smooth a transition for the workers involved as is possible, and that it's done with their full participation and with social dialogue and collective bargaining right along the way. So I would avoid this kind of dichotomy,
Yeah.
communities versus industries. It doesn't work like that in the real world.
No, very, very useful what you say. And indeed, one of the things I recall reading is that the majority, most of the job creation when it comes to hydrogen would, well, say green, blue hydrogen, is actually downstream. So in the use of hydrogen, and particularly if it goes into some of the, unfortunately, the more controversial uses, such as transport, buildings, and so on. It's things like maintenance, maintenance of fuel cell cars and so on. That's where in terms of job creation potential, the bigger potential lies rather than in production. So I suppose there's something to be said then to say, we want different kinds of hydrogen to create a market for hydrogen. Ultimately, we can transform the production, it can become greener and so on, but it's ultimately the use of that hydrogen, which is from a job perspective, the most interesting. There was a question that came in, and I don't know which of you is best to address it. Jan Willem, I'd like to hand the floor to you. I don't know if you can. It was indeed what Judith already said, this question of, I suppose, is there a net, what's the net impact of all this? So the question was, how many workers in the gas sector are going to be affected by this whole transition? How does that compare to the job creation opportunities? I guess the question behind that is, how gloomy does the future look? How optimistic are we that the transition is creating new opportunities, and indeed overall, well, we have to transition, and there will be jobs, basically.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for that, and I'll continue a bit on a line I think Judith already set out earlier. I think she mentioned a figure of some of the scenarios which project new jobs for gas workers, but also indirect jobs, as he referred to the industries as well. And this is, I think, a point Denis raised to some extent earlier. We see a lot of scenarios being developed, and what bugs me, both in the industry, but also others who have critical scenarios, is that often there is no job dimension to these scenarios. The employment dimension is not explored. There is no attention to how jobs are transformed in these scenarios, and that I think bugs me enormous. And obviously that is one of the things we actually are going to explore also in the social dialogue between the employers and the unions, to see how we can develop that, and with more attention for this specific problems. I think the whole question of developing blue hydrogen, or as Denis say, gray hydrogen, all depends on how the different parts of the green plan fit together. If we don't invest in the energy savings potential, which will create jobs, we know that. If we don't make a swift transition to more domestic renewable use, if we do not electrify our transport or other industrial processes, it depends also on the phase out of coal, for example. If all of these parts move not as fast as we want them to move, then obviously the need for blue hydrogen is larger. If we move faster in all of these scenarios, then we can also rely more on green hydrogen to deliver what we want. I want to pick up a point Agnes touched upon earlier in her introduction, which is the need for public investment, and many industries demanding also public investment to help them. And these are difficult decisions. I think we need MEPs and people like Denis and Agnes with their strong commitment to workers, to make also clear that behind the use of public investment, there are also choices to make. And we know the the needs for investment are enormous in the energy sector, but if we want to go to renovate our buildings, our public building stocks, the need for investment are huge. But that also implies, and I think that's not always realized, that also implies choices. Colleagues know I represent also public service workers, including health and social service workers. We have seen that the pandemic also underlines how much investment we need also in those services. So there are choices to be made. And that means also that we have to look in a very clear way how we use public funding. And it cannot be, and I know Denis and Agnes probably are with me in this, it cannot be that we then have companies using that public investment without certain conditions to be applied to that funding. I mean, for trade unions, obviously it's important that we have companies which use that public funding and respect collective agreements, are in a process of us to transform the industry, as Judith said, are in a discussion with us on what it means for the individual company, the individual workers. And I think James was very clear on the commitment of Eurogas to go in that direction. In the questions, there was somebody who said, well, how do you define just transition? I send a link on our joint statement, which does define that just transition. But it also means we expect of companies to live up to environmental commitments, to not be engaged in tax avoidance. I mean, it would be, I think,
ask you to start wrapping up.
Yeah, that's the last point, Sonia. It would be ridiculous for us to give money to companies who then have their use tax havens to escape paying taxes. That we can also not accept. So I think all of these parts hang together, and the better we are in moving forward in energy efficiency, etc., the less need we have for blue hydrogen, and the more we can rely on green hydrogen. And so I think that hangs all together. That's what I want to say.
Okay. I guess I wanted to follow up on that then, and maybe come to Agnes now with a return to the policy dimensions. You've all mentioned the need for a coherent, comprehensive industrial strategy, one that looks along the whole value chain. You said, Agnes, at the start, it's not just about reskilling and upskilling. We need much more than that. And I guess my question is, how well are we doing on all this? So, I mean, the EU has, we have an industrial strategy, we have the just transition mechanism with funding behind it, some of this conditionality, we have a sustainable finance framework that's being established at EU level. And then, then there's a question of predictability. Would it be useful to have, as I've seen some argue, to have phase out plans for fossil oil or gas in this case, to say, every 5 years, this is what we're phasing out. And then within that period, you plan to transition a part of the sector. So what kind of policy tools, I guess, what do you think of what we've got and what's still missing? How far should we go in terms of managing and creating this ultimately politically chosen for transition?
Just first I had to switch off devices because the battery was low, and I thought perhaps just answering a question and then I'm out. So
that's
now
fine. That's fine. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. I didn't miss anything.
No.
It's indeed, I think, the question at the table, how much of the policy is the policy making is not only policy making into silos, which is, I think, happening at the moment, and how are we moving towards a more integrated view on indeed just transition. I think, just to be clear, I'm totally in favor of public investment. And luckily we have money available at the European level. and in some member states, money isn't even that difficult to attract for good investments, because like interest rates are low, etc. But my biggest fear, and I think Judith pinpointed to it, Jan Willem also, that we are only, let's say, there is a group of people totally into environmental changes, or indeed focusing only on the energy sector, not looking at what consequences elsewhere in the economy for jobs and job potentials. And I must say, too often, when people like Denis and I, or people from the trade union movement are saying, but we should do it in a just way, the answer is, but there is money available for skilling and reskilling. And I think that's not enough. I think that's the biggest problem, is that we are still thinking in silos. And then, okay, yes, we heard something social should be done. Okay, we put a little bag of money apart for skilling and risk, or we have the European Social Fund, or there is a globalization fund, and that's exactly the way why people are losing trust in this energy transition.
So what very concretely needs to happen beyond the reskilling and the upskilling and the pots of money?
No, the one thing I already mentioned is consultation, participation, will take the voice of people at the table.
And this is currently not done adequately. So I mean, several of you have mentioned that workers need to be a part of the discussion on the just transition.
Yes, I think, of course, this is a social dialogue at the European level which works quite well, but that's not the case everywhere. It's also quite difficult, but there I also like to ask the question to industriAll, EPSU, and Eurogas, what are they missing? Because from my perspective, I see good willing people trying to put the issue at the table, while at the same moment the train has left the station, and we are only talking about target setting, and then like for instance, you know my country, I'm coming from the Netherlands. We have this like big problems of the gas industry, gas being produced in the north, and we all earned a good living from that. But the people in the north are the ones where the houses are collapsing, earthquakes are happening, etc. And now we are saying, this is the right place for CCS. So if you really want to put the trust of people at risk, play it like that. So I think we need to have more voices at the table, get rid of this silo thinking of policy making, and be, let's say, vocal on, it's not only skilling and reskilling, it's not only the European Social Fund, it's a integrated plan we need for this transition, and we need to act fast, because otherwise,
okay,
we're losing trust.
Yeah,
really so.
Judith, and then I'd like to come back to James after that.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to give some very concrete examples of what we're talking about when we talk about worker participation. So across Europe at the moment, we, together with EPSU and within the ETUC, are part of a major campaign highlighting the fact that in the context of the crisis, we have a crisis in basic workplace rights around information, consultation and participation, where companies, even which had a very historically good relationship with their workforces, have pulled back from even the most basic rights that we have today at European level. Now, going into the level of the transition that we're facing, both digital and climate, we need reinforced rights around information, consultation and participation in companies to ensure that workers are really fully involved in the development of the transition. And there was a question in the chat, which was, what about the people who don't want to engage in the transition, don't want to reskill? But if you've got the workforce, the shop stewards in companies actively involved in dialogue with management, then actually you can deal with many of those questions of the cohesion in the workforce and solutions for different people. Not everybody will necessarily want to transform in their job. They may also want to do other things. Ruptures often create other opportunities for people to change direction, but you need to have an agreed social plan. You know, this is classic trade union or classic industrial relations around restructuring to ensure. But at European level, what we really urgently need is that trade unions are at the table in defining the big, broader strategies. We are fighting to get ourselves heard in relation to national reform and resilience plans or the recovery and resilience plans, which are coming out of the European budget. Just as Agnes said, don't put us in a silo on skills. Don't put the trade unions in a silo on just transition, which is separate from all of the investment, the public investment, which comes also through the recovery plan and through the other instruments in the European budget. These discussions have to be joined up. There has to be a comprehensive view, which is something very practically that we in industriAll are doing with our affiliates in Poland, for example, with the coal phase-out negotiations in other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, because I think we also have to recognise that there are places in Europe where things work more smoothly than elsewhere. So there has to be attention from the European Commission to ensure that where trade unions are blocked from that process, that actually that becomes a mandatory condition on access to funds. You will not be allowed to access recovery funds, just transition funds, if you have not actively engaged with the workforce and with the communities that those funds are aiming towards. That's what participation means really in concrete terms. What we see, unfortunately, in many different sectors, in many different debates, I'm coming to an end, is that in worker participation or worker involvement is one seat at the table. A seat at the table where maybe there are 50 other people at the table. That's not active worker participation, that's tokenism. And if you have tokenism, you create cynicism, and it doesn't generate the social acceptance that is urgently needed if we really want to do this 3-generation shift, which is a colossal challenge facing us all.
Okay. So yeah, a very good point. I think that's clarified very much for me, at least, the potential for what's missing and what dialogue could deliver, including transforming jobs, but also dealing with people whose jobs would actually disappear, and you avoid sort of a cliff edge through this dialogue. James, I wanted to come back to you. Well, you're welcome obviously to pick up on these points that others have raised, but also wanted to put to you the Clean Hydrogen Alliance. We've already had a battery alliance. We've now got a Clean Hydrogen Alliance. One of the goals of that, as far as I understand it, is to also break down these silos and to take a whole value chain approach. Is that the case? I mean, do you see a potential there? And then the other element that came through in another question, what was more of a statement, it said, Northern Europe should set up multi-billion joint ventures with Southern Europe and North Africa, massive production of green hydrogen, etc. The point comes back. So there is a lot of job potential around this, but how do we ensure those jobs are here? And you said Europe is currently leading on many of these new gas technologies. We led in the past, and ultimately they slipped through our hands and are now elsewhere. So what can we do at this stage to ensure that those jobs are here and stay here?
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. I think to start with the alliances good ideas, though, as we've recognized in our joint statement with EPSU and industriAll, they need to also reflect and involve the unions and make sure that they have a seat at the table that isn't tokenism. Fully agree with Jude, and I don't know where that is standing, and I haven't had a chance to chat to Jude or colleagues for a while on that, but I hope they're going to be in the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. I think that's absolutely, you are good, because that's absolutely vital. I think that is it's critical to making it a success. Now, you mentioned the Battery Alliance, a very different kettle of fish. This was set up with the mind of catching up China, because China is the world leader in battery technology. It's not even a question of slipping through the fingers. It's just that they happen to do a lot of investment in battery technology. Maybe their strategic plan back in 2010 was the driver of that. In gas, in hydrogen, we're definitely not in that position. We are in leadership position. That alliance needs to identify projects and build them quickly. But also, I noticed that there are things like the 10E regulation talking about developing electrolyzers. Now, in our joint statement, we make it very clear that an industrial strategy should also support development of finance and political and regulatory support for the gas infrastructure and the gas technologies. So this is actually it's basic industrial strategy that is needed here. And our statement makes it absolutely clear. There's nothing equivocal about it. We have to make sure that when we do the industrial strategies, we invest in the technologies that we have leadership today, because this gives us the best chance of not losing that leadership. Of course, you can just develop technologies and export them a lot. We've seen that as models around the world. However, of course, we'd like to deploy them here in Europe as well. It's not about just being the leaders in deployers. We also need to be the leaders in manufacturing. And so when people are talking about Northern Europe should club together and do something for Southern Europe, and I'm smiling because it's a nice notion, but actually this should be a European Union effort. It's not about North or South or East or West. This should be a European Union effort where we should come together and we should invest in the technologies we need to make sure they are deployed in the areas that we need them. I just want to say, the study we had with DNVGL did not necessarily see a huge amount of imports of hydrogen by 2050. We can actually produce a lot of hydrogen here in Europe, both blue and green and turquoise, if you like, from pyrolysis. But in principle, that does mean that we have the opportunity to basically deploy and produce here, which will change the way that things work. I want to make one comment about the question that we had about jobs, because it really sounds to me like it's an Excel spreadsheet idea that somebody has, is that here we've got jobs on one side and there's jobs on the other, and we're going to cut those jobs, and we've got more. It's like the mentality of World War I general. I'll just, how many men can I kill today and still have an advantage? And I think that's not the right way to look at the energy transition. You should look at the energy transition about all of those individual digits are real people with hopes and fears. And we have to think about them as people and not as digits in an Excel spreadsheet. We have to make sure their communities survive. If their jobs are transitioning, we have to give them the skills. And I think that if we're thinking about, if we get rid of all of those people in the gas sector, but we put them all into energy efficiency, it's fine, it's utter nonsense. And this is not the way that you will get people to support the energy transition. So we have to look at it in a much more, I would say, a more surgical way. And in our statement, we call for regional just transition dialogues and mechanisms. That is what is needed, not Excel spreadsheets that say, my preferred technologies will deliver more jobs than you currently have in your technology, James. So we're going to just wipe them off the board. This is wrong and it should be stopped. People have to think about other people and not just an ideology to achieve something. Because if you only think about your ideology, you won't achieve it. And I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you for that. More food for thought, and we could probably carry on for a while. But I'm conscious we're coming up to time. There's one question that came in that we haven't dealt with at all, which was a question, broader picture, the cross-border adjustment mechanism, so a cross-border carbon tax. Shouldn't that, isn't that going to protect our jobs? I don't know if there's anyone who wants to give a quick comment on that. Judith, yeah.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, we're very in favour, and we have been, the trade union movement have been calling for a carbon border adjustment mechanism now for a very long time as a last resort to deal with an unfair level an unlevel playing field in relation to global carbon prices. But it's not a silver bullet. There is actually no silver bullet in all of these policies. It's the combination of different policies which will deliver that comprehensive industrial policy just transition framework. And we believe that a carbon border adjustment mechanism is vitally important for, particularly for those sectors which are at risk of carbon leakage. We also don't believe that it is automatic. You turn off the tap of free allocations, you turn on the tap of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, in the same way that James has just described, I think, quite colourfully, the human nature, the human dimension of just transition. It also, we have to be realistic to ensure that that comprehensive policy framework actually works in practice. So it's vitally important. It's not a silver bullet, and it needs to be part of the broader picture to ensure that we have an industry at the end of the process of decarbonising.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Radka. You wanted the floor. I'm going to hand over then to your colleague Agnes in a moment.
I was just raising my thumb. I was not raising my hand. I was raising my thumb to underline what Judith says.
Okay, perfect. Before I hand over then to Agnes to close, I mean, maybe to end, one of the other questions that come in was how we define a just transition. And I know you have a definition, Jan Willem, you said you sent it through in your position paper, but maybe very, very quickly in a sentence from each of you, we can talk about this, but what is the main, I guess, yardstick, the main, what should we be looking at to get a feel for, are we going in the right direction on the just transition? How do we measure progress? I can think, for example, you Judith, you talked a lot about dialogue. So, you know, dialogue is the key thing. We need to be looking at increasing dialogue. Does anyone else have so not a definition as such, but what for you is really at the core of the just transition is the thing we need to be keeping an eye on to know that we are, you know, heading in the right direction? Is there anyone who wants to? Yeah, Jan Willem.
Since you asked for a short sentence, I would benchmark if we are going in the right direction and implementing just transition, if there are social plans discussed, negotiated with the workforce, both in a company which is faced with how it responds to meet the targets we have to reduce CO2 emissions, and in the sector. So not just only workplace plans, but also sector plans, not just sector plans, but also workplace plans. I would say that is a benchmark. If companies and unions in the companies and in the sectors have achieved that, then we are on the right way. Then we know what we talk about, and we know that we can deliver also. And as all speakers before me said, we take people with us now, and there is acceptance for moving in the right direction. That would be my benchmark.
Okay, that's clear. Is there anyone else who wants to contribute on that?
I agree with that, but I also think there are some broader indicators and benchmarks which would cover the whole of the economy, around job quality in the economy, around regional inequalities. I think if we see the depopulation of certain regions, as you know, James grew up in Wales, I grew up in the north, I'm from the northeast of England. We saw what disastrous, unplanned restructuring did in terms of depopulation of regions and the long-term social and economic inequalities that generates. So I think we should have a benchmark of social and economic equality indicators and the quality of work, and that will indicate, because people will move between sectors, the economy will change, business models will change, but if we can see that the quality of work in Europe and the regional equalities are reduced in Europe, then that's an indication that just transition is heading in the right direction for the whole of the European Union and for the whole of our economy.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Either
James maybe one short sentence to this. I think Agnes and I made a proposal in our report how to measure if just transition is fair or not. We made a proposal, and it's just up to the parliament to say yes to this. It's very easy.
Okay, and an invitation for everyone to read that report thoroughly so you know what you should be looking out for. James, anything from you? Otherwise I'll...
No, I just add, I think that it's very clear that for me, a just transition involves making sure that there is full recognition of the communities and the community transition. And so therefore a strong focus on local and regional initiatives. And I fully agree with Jude, this is about job quality. There needs to be some sort of job quality indexation. So It's not about just moving a person from one job to another. It's, does that quality of that job survive? Is that job still going to be unionized? Is it still fully professional and skilled? Those are the sort of things that I think really make a difference to getting the buy-in, the public acceptance of this transition. And so basically it's kind of reiterating what Jude said, but I think that's fundamental to how we get a just transition.
Okay, thank you. Agnes, I'd like to hand over to you then to wrap up for today. And of course, feel free to answer the question I put to the others as well.
Okay. Let me say, perhaps it's a little bit disappointing that there is not one silver bullet. Although I, of course, like the idea that Denis is putting on the table, that voting in favor of our report is the silver bullet. But that would be perhaps a little bit too vain. Huh? If you think that our report is the bullet, but it's putting this benchmark on the table. So, for instance, we have in the report a different line of overcoming this crisis than in the previous crisis. So now we are saying raise the minimum wages, raise the level of collective bargaining, put an end to insecure zero hours contract, and make collective bargaining the key indicator for work at the European level. But let me say that I'm totally convinced that people have changed and will change. They did it in the past. They do it at the moment. People going from the airline industry into healthcare is an example most used in the Netherlands at this moment. People can adjust, but then we have to indeed make sure that the conditions of this change are being met. I must say I've learned a lot in this 1.5 hour webinar, so thank you for organizing this. There is a lot of food of thought at the table, because I think, as James said, it should be the community, the local level, which should take the lead. I'm also agreeing with Jan Willem's plea for having social plans at workshop and on sectoral level. I think it's indeed time to end spreadsheet management and put people really at the center of the attention. And we are not there yet. So we need to keep pushing for this just transition where indeed taking everyone on board is not a hollow phrase. But I think here in this webinar, we touched upon aspects of this just transition. And we encountered committed people, so thank you for that. And with that, I think we made good use of the last webinar before Christmas. And let me just end with my hope that everyone will enjoy a peaceful Christmas, although Christmas 2020 is different than the ones before. Please rest a little bit because we all need each other in the next year to fight for real just transition. So until that, fingers crossed for our report and the voting. We are preparing next year for the Portuguese presidency, who put the social issues as their highest priority. We are all preparing for a social summit in May in Porto. And I think the organizations in this call are very well qualified to have the voice of people at the Porto Summit. So thank you for this, and thank you also for moderating this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that leaves me with nothing to say except to echo what you said and to thank everyone who made this morning possible. On the just transition front, the line I often retain in the debates of this type of content are that ultimately the shift to a low carbon energy system is costing a lot, it's expensive, but it is good fundamentally for job creation because such a system is more decentralized and more labor intensive. So it's a question of finding out what those new jobs are, where they are, but they should be there. That's the message I try and remember when things get difficult. A big thank you to you all, our two MEPs. Good luck tomorrow. Today and tomorrow, we'll be thinking of you. And thank you to the three organizations who made this morning possible. So industriAll Europe, EPSU and Eurogas. And we look forward to seeing you again next year for more fun and games and exciting debates. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.